Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. Thanks for joining me. For anybody who's new or if you're a long-time listener at all, I don't say this enough, but if you could share the podcast, like it, do whatever happens on the platform that you listen to it on, review it, etc. All those things really help the reach of the podcast, and I'd really appreciate it. I get a lot of great feedback, but I also don't really ask for much, and I don't really market it a whole lot. We've had some incredible guests on here and really, really great conversations. I've got a lot more planned for 2026, and I would love it if you would just like it or share it or do whatever you can. So it is January 2026. Which is kind of hard to believe for somebody born in 1969. And it seems a little bit like this is sci-fi or the future, but here we are. I suppose if you were born in 2005 or something like that, then it seems like not a big deal at all. But it's a little odd for me. I did take a bit of a break here over the holidays and the end of the year. Just really needed some time down and off from the podcast and other things. Life has just been exceptionally busy this last year with all the things that I try to balance. And I do strive to get a podcast out every week. I don't always hit it, but I do try to make that effort and have the consistency to make sure that you all have a good conversation to listen to in this world. So I have been doing this now for this podcast for 3 years. And it's been a really great experience. It's been better than I expected it to be. It's gotten a lot more traction than I expected it to get. And I thought it would be good at this point now, upon a little bit of reflection, to just discuss a little bit more with you all why I do it and just some of my thoughts going forward, like what I want to focus on with the podcast. Because it's, I know you all have a lot of choices and things you want to listen to. And as do I, and let's make sure that we're aligned. This is going to be some of you are going to love the content on this, and increasingly more people are, which is great. But it's not for everybody. And I will say it's kind of funny when I first started doing this. The notes that I had that I put down about in terms of content were a lot about how can I try to help people kind of get out of their bubbles. Which is just a pet interest of mine. We all tend to live and exist in our own little bubbles, whether that's the bubble of a place we are, an intellectual bubble, a social bubble, a professional bubble, whatever it is. And I have always been one of those persons that tries to poke at bubbles because I feel like it can be really, really bad for people to just kind of lock into your own point of view and not really hear other folks that may disagree, that may have other points of view, et cetera. And it's something that I've always enjoyed. I've just personally enjoyed hearing from people that I may previously have not listened to, not agreed with. And throughout the course of my life, I think most of the most interesting conversations that I've had with people were probably with people who I initially really thought I was going to disagree with, and I probably did. But I learned something really revealing from either talking with them or hearing a presentation, et cetera. And so I really had that down as like a formative thing that I wanted to try to help get people out of their bubbles a little bit in the planning, development, design world. In fact, that's like the note that I have in my iOS notes. It's like about bubbles. But I don't know how much I've done of that. I think I've done some of that over the last 3 years. Instead, I probably focused a lot more just on conversations with people in the development, design, and planning worlds. And I think some of those may open some different thoughts for people who are, or open some conversations for people who haven't heard these ideas before. But it hasn't been probably as intentional from where I started initially. And I think that's actually okay, because the way that things have evolved, it's really helped clarify for me, the kind of people that I want to talk with and the conversations I'd like to have on the podcast. And I really put those in a couple different buckets. But, one thing is that I go back a lot to this framework that I learned years ago, what we called the 3 pillars of community building, which were design, policy, and management. And I think most of us most of us tend to come from one piece of that triangle, the design side, the policy side, or the management side. An observation that I have had over the years is that the policy side tends to dominate so many conversations about, cities and communities, et cetera. And I find that to be really problematic and disappointing. And frankly, after a while, it just gets really boring. I think a general observation I have is there are just way too many people who are obsessed with policy. Policy is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but I feel like there's so many groups. I see this in my own city a lot. There are so many groups, so many individuals who really want to be sort of like the chief policymaker for their city, but they don't really want to take action themselves and do a project. And I think if I could give a single piece of advice to individuals or to groups in, who are in this space, it's go do projects. Take action yourself. And one of the things I really like to highlight in this podcast are just people who are taking initiative themselves to make things happen. I feel like we very much overvalue sort of policy wonkery. And I say that as somebody who I am almost certainly what a lot of people would consider sort of a policy wonk when it comes to zoning and development policy. I've learned so much over the years that I never intended to learn. And I understand, some changes I think that could really happen that need to happen to make things better. And we'll have those conversations. I'm not saying it's not important, but I really wish more people would find space in their lives to just go do projects. You can just have so much more of an impact on your own life in a positive way, and maybe your community, your world, however you want it to be. So I have especially enjoyed these conversations here where we talk with people who have done something. They have taken action themselves. And I'm going to continue to do that. That's going to be a big part of what I like to focus on. I find those stories interesting. I find people like that much more interesting to talk to, and the trials and tribulations of people who are really trying to make things happen. I especially enjoy those conversations in places that you may not have heard of before, that a whole lot of people may not have heard about before. And I think if you listen to some of these episodes in the past, you probably know what I'm talking about. But I find a lot of that work especially fascinating, and I'll get into that more into a second. But I also really like to focus on development in these episodes and demystifying it. Because number one, because I think development is really noble work, and I really would like more people to do it. It's just it's a great field. You don't have to have a particular degree to become a developer. In fact, some of the developers that I've interviewed on this show before are people who just did it out of nothing but hustle. They didn't have to go get a finance degree or an architecture degree or something to go do it. They just made things happen on their own. So I really am going to continue to try to have those conversations with people who make projects happen. And I really would hope that inspires more people to take risks and try to become developers themselves. I'm also an architect, so I care a ton about design, and that'll come through. That's come through in the past. We're going to talk to more architects, but I really also feel like trying to, for the developers in my world, I would love for my developers to understand and value good design, and especially those human traditions that have worked for eons. And there's so much to be learned from previous generations about how they approach design. And there are incredible people who've done work over the last 50 years that have revived a lot of those traditions, who understand them well, who've drawn them, who teach them. But it's still, we don't get nearly the reach for people to pick up on those things. And there's a lot of great design techniques and tricks we can use to make our development better. So, and lastly, I care about the management of cities. So if I go back to that triangle, design, policy, and management, I care a lot about the management of cities because I'm in that world now as part of my day job. And I just don't think we've discussed the impact of it very much at all. It's remarkable to me that there's so much energy put into like policy prescriptions, and just so little thought about who are the actual people who are going to implement things. Who are these, how are those things going to get done? It's not just, AI and robots that are going to do it all. We actually need people who care about and know how to manage neighborhoods and communities to make good things happen, to have functional places. So I would like for all three of those legs of the triangle to understand and value each other and their impact on the world. But I especially like to highlight people within each of those worlds that are doers and risk takers, because nothing that we want to happen from a development standpoint is going to happen without doers and risk takers. And then, frankly, a financing system that supports them and allows that to happen. So, and encourages it to happen. So, if I have one overriding message I really want to continue to give to people is that you have agency. You can make good things happen yourself. You don't have to wait on committees. You don't have to seek the approval of credentialed experts. That you, in fact, can just do things. And in fact, that's how most good things get done, is somebody just decides to do them. And a corollary to that is that, life is competitive. We can't wash that away. That's part of our human nature. There are some people who think that we can just, all be nice to each other. And I'm a nice person. I like to get along with people myself. But there is competition in everything in life. You can't ignore it. You have to, at a certain point, embrace it and learn to deal with it. And that's part of who we are and what it will always be the case. So if you want to do things, just try it yourself. Just make something happen. Just take a step. And I've interviewed many, many people who've just done that thing in all three legs of those triangles that I just talked about, and especially in development. So I also want to mention a little bit about, my geographic focus. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. So right smack in the middle of the country. And I have lived, also in Savannah, Georgia. I have traveled virtually the entire country. I've been in every state except for Alaska. I'm a pretty well-traveled person, been, done a lot of international travel as well. So I appreciate and enjoy lots and lots of different kinds of places. And I consider myself a city person. So I like big cities. And I like the life and energy that comes from big cities. But I also want to be really clear that what I think I really, what I hope comes through is this: the places that I care about the most in these conversations are the much more typical American cities and towns and their own issues, and trying to figure out how to help them improve. I love what people derisively call flyover country. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a great place to live. I think the people are terrific. And my priority at this point in my life is really working in places in these parts of the country. I read the news. I know what's going on in New York or San Francisco, or Los Angeles. But and I enjoy those cities. Think a lot of them are really cool places, but at the end of the day, I just don't really care that much about what happens in a lot of our major, the half a dozen or so of our cultural capitals in the country. Um, and maybe that sounds too harsh. Maybe I shouldn't say I don't care, but I just don't have the energy to focus on it. And I don't know why I should care who the mayor of one of those cities is and what they're doing. And I know, sure, there's downstream impact from cultural capitals, but the reality is, I would like to find ways for more people in not those half a dozen cities to take ownership of their place and agency and improve them, and not really focus on what happens. And let me give an example. So, like, one thing that I've talked about in the past is that, a lot of people who are in smaller or medium-sized metropolitan areas tend to say, "Oh, look what, New York just did the High Line. God, that's amazing. We need to do the High Line in our city." And there's a fixation that a lot of people have in smaller cities to what goes on in New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles that is unhealthy. And it's unhealthy for a variety of reasons. But number one, like, the reason is, there's one city in North America that is like New York, and that's New York. That's it. There are things that you can do in those places that you just cannot do in any other city in the country, that just aren't going to work anywhere else for about 10 different reasons. And so it's cool to experience. And I think it's good to be a cultured person and learn about them, enjoy them, et cetera. But, but when somebody says to me, like in Kansas City, "Oh, we should do like the High Line here," I'm like, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to have the same impact. We have to do things here that fit here. That grow out of the kind of community we are and the kind of people that are here and the nature of what our city is. And this is a message that, I don't, again, I'm not trying to, I don't want to be the person that like attacks those bigger sort of cultural capitals, but it's more about, I think it's more interesting for the work of this podcast to focus on the places that are not the big places on the map. And that the 6 places that you read about all the time, or if you read quote unquote urbanist magazines, that it's like always the same, 6 cities that people are talking about. Oh, occasionally they might add 2 or 3 more in there. They might talk about Austin or whatever, but or Nashville, but they really don't want to talk about those places. They want to, there's a certain small group that they always want to talk to or talk about. And that's just not where I care to put my focus. And frankly, I think it's really bad for our society, our country, to just have a focus on such a very small group of cities. Frankly, I think it's civilizational suicide to just focus on this handful of places, and to think that, like, if you're a young, aspirational, ambitious person, that you have to move to one of those places to have a good life. Some of this became more prominent for me over the holidays. So one of the things that we've tended to do the last several years is, in the midst of all the holiday craziness, we'll take a day and a half, and send the kids to one of my sisters, and they'll do an overnight, and my wife and I'll do we'll take a very short trip to a nearby community or something, and just kind of spend a day and a night and some time there and see what's going on, and maybe a place that we don't generally explore very much. So this time we actually went to St. Joseph, Missouri, and spent probably, not, I don't know, 24 hours in St. Joe, something like that. St. Joe's just about an hour north of Kansas City. And it's a fascinating place. I've been there before, been there many times, but I hadn't really kind of spent a lot of time just hanging out there, and enjoying it almost like a tourist. And like I said before, I'm pretty widely traveled, and I've been to the places that have a lot going on, and I'm very much sympathetic to the idea that we have made everything way too hard in the major cities and cultural capitals of America and a lot of places. We've got to find ways. We've got to find solutions to fix those places. They need to fix themselves, and I completely agree with that. But what I also observe is that in a whole lot of the country is a very different problem. And that we have lots and lots of places that have really great bones, so to speak, and assets that are basically dying a slow death. And that a lot of young people, especially the ambitious and talented ones, tend to leave these places and don't come back. And this is, again, like I said, I feel like this is an enormous problem for a society, because these places need you. They need you. They need your energy. They need your initiative and excitement. And when those people abandon those places, there's nothing really good that happens. You lose a key part of what can make a place successful. So this is something that came front of mind when we were spending the weekend in St. Joe. St. Joe is a city of about 70,000 people in a metro of 120,000. One of the interesting things, so if you think back about historically, St. Joe was a pretty large city in the late 19th century. The Pony Express is famously from St. Joe. That's where it left from. And it was a larger and more important community on this side of Missouri than Kansas City was in that era. But what happened was there was a major political battle to see which city was going to get the railroad bridge over the Missouri River in that era. And Kansas City won that battle. And as a smaller city at the time, Kansas City won the battle. It had the political influence. It got the bridge, and Kansas City boomed and became, frankly, one of the 2 or 3 biggest rail hubs in the country, as it still is today, especially for freight rail traffic. And St. Joe stalled out, and it basically has never gained population since. And the city of St. Joe itself has actually lost population since that period. So in a certain sense, it's fascinating because it has really great architecture from an era when we built really great buildings, when there was a lot of wealth in St. Joe in the 19th century. There's a lot of really cool buildings. They've also had an enormous amount of demolition, as you might imagine, that places like that had. They had not just decline, but then they had urban renewal and then further decline. And so there's a lot of really great architecture that's been lost, but there's still a tremendous amount remaining. It's really a fascinating place to kind of hang out in, for a little while. And this is kind of what I think about when I think about a place like, St. Joe. First of all, it's incredibly affordable. Like if a young person, if you think, God, I'm never going to be able to afford a house, guess what? You can go to St. Joseph, Missouri, and you can afford a house. Now let's talk about, the reality of that, what the pros and cons of a place like this. Is this, does this have the culture of, Brooklyn or Austin or Nashville? No, not at all. But it's also not the cultural backwater that people might think it is. This is a place that has a symphony orchestra. It has a nice art museum. If you like great espresso, there's multiple places where you can get it. There's breweries. There's incredible parks and parkways. Really nice people who, have a love for the area and the pride, beautiful architecture. Does it have a dozen sushi places, with the finest and latest, coolest, hippest dishes? No, it doesn't. And you're going to find that in a lot of places like this. And, there are probably hundreds of places that are like this community all over, not just the Midwest and the upper Midwest, but, in the South, even in parts of the West, in New England for sure. There are a lot of communities like this that actually have great assets and a really high quality of life, but we don't talk a whole lot about what can be done to, why these are not aspirational places to live. What can we do to encourage people to want to live there, to take ownership of places like this and improve them, because they really do have great qualities. I haven't even had on this show yet, which I need to do, my friend Max Gunther, who is an architect, that he had a successful architectural practice in Hawaii that he basically shut down and moved back to, he's from St. Joe, and he moved back to St. Joe to kind of help take over and deal with the family, a multi-generation family business and some of the property they own. And I need to do that. Max is a really talented architect as well. But it's an interesting story that, he kind of left the glamour of Hawaii to come back to St. Joseph, Missouri. That's not a story you hear of very much. And, so we should talk about that. But I would just say, if I had any wish for a lot of people who listen to this, and for a lot of young men in particular, is I wish more people would adopt these places and, figure out how to buy some crappy old building and fix it up, and then do another one, and then do another one, and to really become a part of that community and part of the revival of a lot of these places. And, I think about, people I've had on the show, like Justin Prejeant in Atchison, Kansas, just across the river from St. Joe, basically. And the work that he's doing. Doug Moss, who I had in Taylor, Texas, coming back to his hometown in Taylor, Texas. And, I should say, I'm not trying to make this just about men either. We've had I've had some great female guests on here, people like Bernice Radel in Buffalo, Allie Quinlan in Northwest Arkansas, and my friend Abby Newsham here in Kansas City, all doing just incredible work and very, very capable. Women can do this too. But I do say, I look at the numbers occasionally. I know that the audience of this skews heavily male. And as a man, I also do have a lot of younger men who come to me and ask for advice on things a lot of times. And I see a lot of men who are looking for meaning or purpose in what they're doing. And I think there's incredible purpose that could be had from taking on work like a lot of the guests that I've had on this show have done. Let me just run through a few of these people that we've had on here. Jared Wheeler in Iola, Kansas. The work that they talked about, what they're trying to do in Iola and Humboldt, Kansas. Incredible stuff. My friend Butch Rigby here, who now people think of as a big shot developer in Kansas City. He started from nothing. And, he started by renovating houses here with, himself. Another colleague of mine, Boulevard Brewing is a big name now in the beer industry and headquartered here in Kansas City. Boulevard Brewing was started by John McDonald, who is a carpenter, and he was renovating older homes here in Kansas City. And then he learned, he liked beer. He learned how to do some home brewing, but he made the money to start Boulevard Brewing basically by, fixing up old houses. And that was an outgrowth of it. And now it's this incredible, international brand. I had Jesse Russell and Ryan Andrews on here from Bend, Oregon. Incredible stuff that they're doing. And they're developing a local investment fund in Bend. Now, Bend is not a struggling place per se, like some of these other places. But it's not sexy like the big communities on the West Coast are. I had Kerry Westerbeck in Bothell, Washington. Great guy doing amazing stuff. Charles Brewer, who made a lot of money in the internet world and decided to become a developer, and now has been building a new town on the coast of Costa Rica called Las Catalinas. Did you know you can do that? Did you know that you can buy property and design and build your own town? I'm not sure how many people know that that's a thing. Did you know that pretty much every city in town that's on the map today that exists, it exists because somebody decided to start it there. That it wasn't sort of plumped down by a computer. There were humans, there were individuals who did that. And some of those places worked and some of them didn't. But the reason there's success is because people committed to doing it themselves. Steve Nygren, who I had on here recently, who built Serenbe outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Another remarkable work. He didn't set out to become a developer when he was a young man, but he ended up there, and look what he's done. My friend Seth Zarin in Providence, Rhode Island, who started as a city planner. And guess what? Now he's a developer. Now he's doing development and he's having an impact on planning. He's having a bigger impact on planning and advocacy because he does development. And it's remarkable. And he's applying all those skills. Locally, my friend Shamari Benton, who decided to take on development here in the Vine District in Kansas City, Missouri, and really try to revive that legacy of 18th and Vine and build upon it. And because it's meaningful to him. So he's not pressing forward and just saying we need to have X or Y policy. He's actually working with partners to buy buildings and renovate them and make sure those stories are still told. Mike Keene in South Bend, Indiana, retired professor becoming a developer. Alan Branch in Panama City, Florida, the town he grew up in, and now he's the mayor. He's a developer and he became the mayor. I've had Coach Chad Carson on here in Clemson, South Carolina. Chad's a brilliant guy. He teaches people how to achieve financial independence through real estate. And he's wanting to do more and more sort of community impact development himself. And he's gotten involved to try to help build a trail network in his own community. Frank Starkey in Newport Richey, Florida. Frank, worked on family property to develop a new community with his family there. Really incredible stuff. I mean, the list just kind of goes on here, but I think about, from in the public sector side, I've had Rebecca Kick in Kalamazoo, Michigan, John Zana in Memphis, Tennessee. John, I'm sorry if I screwed up your last name. Jason Segedy in Akron and now North Canton, Ohio. All of these are people who they're on the public sector side, but they're sticking their neck out and taking risks and pushing forward and doing things that are improving their own communities. So you can do it from the public side as well. I had John Hay on here. Gosh, John, I'm sorry if I screw up that. It's Hay or High, who is at Benedictine University in Atchison, Kansas, starting a new architecture school. They're creating a new architecture school from scratch, focused on longstanding traditions of architecture that go back centuries. Terrell Jolly, who I had on here, who's doing affordable housing in Kansas City, Missouri, just bootstrapping it. He's not content to just be a policy wonk and push policy to force other people to do something. He's actually buying properties and doing it himself, and he's figuring it out. That's a tangent, but it's like there are so many people in the affordable housing world who raise like literally millions of dollars to try to, create policy initiatives to force people to do things, to force developers to do things. And I just think to myself, that money could be put to such incredible good use by people, buying properties. There are groups here who lobby to change policy and literally spend millions of dollars doing it. They could buy housing and make it permanent affordable housing if they wanted to do that with that same money. And what would have a bigger impact? Because frankly, a lot of the policy stuff doesn't even work or doesn't produce the result that people think. So there's just so much more that could be done. My friend Monty Anderson in Duncanville, Texas and South Dallas, Texas, God, the stuff that he does is so creative, and his work on so-called obsolete properties is just fantastic. And there's so much for people to learn by his approach. Clay Chapman and Austin Tennell in Oklahoma, they're reviving, true masonry construction. Just incredible work, beautiful. Austin is now taking it to the next level and really developing a bigger and bolder business plans from it. And then, on the human side of things, I have like Seth Kaplan, who in Bethesda, Maryland, is talking about really the software side of all of this, the human side. How do you be proactive to really create the sense of community wherever you live? Just an incredible guy and really somebody to learn from so much. For those of us who work more on the sticks and the bricks, talking to people like Seth Kaplan is really helpful because it brings it all back to the human side. And then, I had the guys on from California Forever, who are trying to build a whole new city from scratch in the Bay Area. And it's an incredible effort. I'm not going to have a ton of guests on here who are doing big, huge, bold things, but I will occasionally. Because I think it's important. I still think it's a very human side of us as well. We like to dream and dream big. And it's fun and interesting to highlight those people who are really swinging for the fences. And again, did you know that you could just buy land in California and just build a new city? Did you know you can do that? Well, they're trying to do it. And I think they're going to be successful. So setting aside California forever for a moment, do you recognize anything? Does anything in common about a lot of those guests? Well, other than the fact that it's just people taking initiative, it's also almost none of that happened. None of those people are from the superstar cities. Very few of them that supposedly have all the opportunities and where you're supposed to go as a young person to succeed and to live a good life. Very few are in sexy places with a high cost of living. So that's the kind of stuff that I like to focus on. This is still an enormous country with incredible opportunity for a great life in many, many places that are off the radar. And I think we've lost a little sight of that. And there are people who could say to me, there are certainly people who might say, Kevin, you live in a big city, I'm in one of the sexier locations in that big city. And I suppose that's true in some sense. I'm in the middle of Kansas City. For probably a lot of people within a couple 100 miles of here, this might seem like the big sexy place, but I'm also, pretty well aware that outside of our little Midwestern bubble, that a lot of people on the coasts would think that anything in the middle of the country is kind of a backwater. And, it's a running joke that most people probably couldn't find Kansas or Missouri on a map if you're from the East or the West Coast. And don't really give any of us a second thought. And that's fine, actually, which I it's the sort of thing that used to have a chip on my shoulder about when I was a young person. And now I don't mind it at all. It's just, it's really okay. So I think for people who are looking for purpose or meaning in the work that they do, not necessarily like a spiritual purpose, but in the work that you do, the day-to-day things that you do, these are things that these sorts of people that I interview, I hope are inspiration. You might say that corporate America doesn't want you, or institutional America doesn't want you, or there's not a place for you there. And I said, that's fine. That's good. Go somewhere that does want you and somewhere that does need you. In a certain sense, I think it's really great to do something hard because it's hard. When you succeed at something that's hard, there's nothing more rewarding than that success. When you succeed at something that's easy, okay, it feels good for a minute. I've taken on things in my life that were pretty easy and done well, and I've taken on some hard things, and the hard things are the ones that I remember, that I feel the best about. If you're a young person, if you go to one of these smaller cities or towns, like a St. Joe, Missouri, for example, or some of these other places, are you going to love it? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It's a different culture than sort of urban professional America. There's a lot of problems in these communities. There's, economic problems. There's been issues with drug use. There's lack of a lot of, so-called big city amenities and services. So there's things that people, you may or may not like, but they can also be really great. For one, I mentioned you can actually afford to live there. So the idea that you could own a house is still accessible in just a vast array of places across the country. You might not be able to own a house in New York or San Francisco or LA without, a really incredible job, but you can do it in these other places. And you can not just own a house, but you could thrive. You might own multiple houses. You might be able to actually afford to start a family. You might become a pillar of the community if you really dig in. And the reality is you just can't do that in a lot of places. I used to think to myself when I was young, it sounds bad, but how about when I was in my 20s? I had a lot of friends that after architecture school went to Chicago or Seattle or some of the larger cities in the country, or San Francisco. And I stuck around Kansas City. And, I was, within just a couple of years being out of school, I was involved in organizations and boards, and starting to get to know people who were important in my community. And that was incredibly interesting and rewarding to me. And I can tell you for a fact that was never going to happen if I went to Chicago, for example. There are some places that it's just too big and too hard, and it just takes decades to be able to build a network and get to know sort of the movers and shakers, or become a mover and shaker. So even in a city like Kansas City, which is not a small city, that was much more accessible. It's much easier to sort of become that, to have that civic involvement, if that's what you want to do. If that appeals to you, it's much easier in a smaller place than it is a bigger place. So that's also something to think about. I just want to say, I think as humans, we are meant to create. We're meant to build and create. I'm going to borrow a line from the movie Office Space, which had an impact on some of us of my age back in, I think, 90. I think it came out in 99. But, human beings were not meant to sit and stare at screens all day long. I don't think we're meant to be HR commissars. I think we're meant to create and build and get our hands dirty. And if you want to do that, go do it in the real world. Do something where AI and the robot revolution is not going to impact your job, or at least not anytime soon. I still think there's a high likelihood within a decade that a whole lot of white collar middle management jobs are going to be gone because of emerging technologies. I still think there's going to be a ton of opportunity, and there's opportunity in a lot of these communities that need you and need your energy, your knowledge, even your strength to get things done. So why not start doing it now? Do something useful now. Get a head start on it. That's really what I wanted to share today. It's what I've been thinking about. It's where I would like to go with future directions of this podcast. I've got a couple of episodes in the can that I've recorded already that I really enjoyed, and I hope to do more along these lines throughout 2026. I will say, if you have suggestions or thoughts for somebody that you think I should have on there, have on the show and have a conversation with, just shoot me a line. I'm super easy to find. You can also message me through the Substack portal. So there's options for you there. Thanks again. I appreciate everybody listening. I hope everybody has a great 2026. Talk to you later.